Welcome back, everyone. It's Peter Tragos, the lawyer you know, and today we're going to react to some of the interviews Brian Flores and his lawyers are doing as they go through what we as the sports fans know as the ESPN car wash. They've done interviews on morning shows, on ESPN shows, on radio shows. They are going through the gambit of interviewing and getting interviewed by everyone who wants to talk about this case. They have just about 100% support as they go on every single one of these shows and talk about the lawsuit, which should not be a surprise to any of you that watched my first video and you read through the complaint and saw that they wrote it for this specific reason. They knew people were going to be reading it, they knew people were going to be talking about it, and they knew they were going to get interviewed and questioned on everything in that complaint. A lot of the interviews focus on the stories we already spoke about, but we do get some new information from these interviews. So make sure you listen along, listen to what they say, listen to what wasn't in the complaint, and how we kind of can see where this is going. So if you haven't subscribed to our channel already, please go and subscribe. We're getting close to 30K, which is awesome. So if you can help us get to that number, that would be great. And if you enjoyed the video, give us a like. So the first video I want to look at is of one of the plaintiff's lawyers, and he talks about kind of their thinking in filing this lawsuit. You know, a lot of people say plaintiff's lawyers like to posture, they like to peacock. When we looked at the Deshaun Watson case, those interviews had a certain kind of vibe. This one's a little bit different. Usually the lawyers want to say, no chance we settle this case, we're going to trial every time, and are super aggressive. This has a little bit different of a feel, which is going to be interesting kind of as we discuss it. And it's very unusual that this quickly after filing a complaint is the actual plaintiff and the lawyers giving so many statements that we are going to see again in depositions. We're only going to watch one or two videos here, but I encourage you to go look. There are 10 or 15 interviews that Brian Flores has done, and they are all incredibly similar. He uses the same phraseology. There are certain things that he sticks to, and he does a great job of explaining exactly what happened, not going too far in his answers, so that if he does have his deposition taken, his answers are going to be consistent. And a lot of times what makes that easy is if it is in fact the truth. So this is some points in Brian Flores' favor that he has the same story as we go throughout. He is kind of building up credibility, saying, I stand for truth, I stand for integrity. That's why I made the decisions I made, which is, you know, if this does go to a jury, something that the jury may think, well, good, we can believe what this guy says, which is very important. The most important witness in every case is, in fact, the client, whether it's the plaintiff or the defendant. So let's listen to what his first lawyer has to say here.
Is this something you would consider settling, or is this something where you feel it's important to go to trial?
Well, Mr. Flores wants change in the NFL. I think he also said this morning that that was his primary goal here. And that could be achieved through resolution if the NFL is willing to take real steps to try to change the face of its ownership in the league, the color of its general managers, the color of its head coaches, color of its coordinators, et cetera. So if the NFL is prepared to take real steps, not just give lip service to diversity and inclusion and equal opportunity, that can be part of a resolution. That said, we're looking forward to litigating this case. We're looking forward to taking the depositions, to gathering the documents and the information that we believe will corroborate not just our clients' claims, but really the more important, bigger picture here, which is systemic in the NFL.
All right. So he said they would look forward to settling and they would settle this case, but they also look forward to litigating it, doing depositions, and finding out more of the truth, which is the real threat, I think, to the NFL, is pulling the curtain back and we get to see everything as the public, okay? And they are making it clear from the jump. And this is why it's so important to point out that they're doing these interviews so early and so often that whatever they find out, the public is going to hear. The public is going to know. So the NFL knows that. So if they want to make change without any of us actually get to see behind the curtain, they got to do it now. They got to give Brian Flores and his lawyers the win. They've got to make real change and put in more rules. Okay? But let's break down a couple of the comments that he said. First, he said we have to change the color of ownership, general managers, and coaches. Something I think is really interesting is that there are more minority general managers than there are head coaches. And a lot of times the general managers make the hiring decisions for the head coaches. So why is that number not at least equal based on this lawsuit and based on what Brian Flores is claiming? Or is he also saying those 6 general managers, even though they're minorities, are also racist and also built into this systemic racism? I think that's a question that we're going to have throughout this process. Or what most people are pointing out, I think correctly, which is where the biggest change would come in ownership. All of the owners are not black, we'll say, because I think one of the owners may be considered a minority, but we'll say none of the owners are black, because that's, I think, they do focus more on black than they do minority in the complaint. So I think it's important that we probably focus on that as well. So none of the owners are black, and maybe that is the change we actually need. So what would that look like? Forcing a sale of a team to a black owner, okay? That's the best option. I don't want to say forcing a sale. So the next time one comes up, putting a black person at the front of the line to buy the team, okay? I think that might be a good option. But I don't think that that owner should be forced to take a discount to sell to a black owner, right? They should get the value of what it is that they own. We would never do that in society where you sell a business and you have to sell it at a discount, unless it's to the government, that is. But maybe there's a way that they can bridge that gap. Like the rest of the owners pitch in to make it worth what that valuation is, and the black owner buys as much of it as they can. Or some kind of subsidy or some other company that comes through it, okay? What I think is not a good option is building a huge group of owners that are gonna buy a team, and they're all black owners, so it's gonna be black owned, but there's 1,000 owners, let's say, which make it more affordable. Because if you've ever bought into something with somebody, whether it's a house or a business, and then you have a disagreement, what always ends up happening? Litigation and problems, and one person wants to sell and one person doesn't. That's why there are majority and minority owners, not by race, but the amount you own. Because the majority owner is the decision maker. The minority owners, where you see, some celebrity owns a little piece of the Brooklyn Nets or something, they don't have decision-making power. So if you were going to have this group of minority or black owners, I could see some major problems if there wasn't one decision maker. So we've got to make sure we don't have a problem where half of the owners want to sell, and then we create the same problem we're in where 51% of the black owners sell because they're making billions of dollars, and now we have one white majority owner again. And all we did was create all these procedural issues to get there. So how do we create real change in the ownership? And then the trickle-down effect would potentially happen. I think that's kind of what they're looking for. And then he also said they want real change, not just lip service. And I think that's a wink at the Rooney Rule. And we'll hear more in these interviews about the Rooney Rule and whether or not it's working. And you can imagine a problem, right? In these interviews, these GMs and these coaches and these owners are not starting from ground zero from any of these candidates. Everyone that gets a job either has been a college coach, an NFL assistant coach, an NFL player, in the front office somewhere. They have already either worked with them or have somebody on staff that has worked with them or know somebody that's worked with them. They know so much information about every one of these candidates that come in. So it's not starting from ground zero. It's not level playing field, no matter what your race is. It's not level playing field because they already have certain things they want. They either want an offensive coach or they want a defensive coach or somebody with a certain culture that worked for Bill Belichick or Sean McVay or whatever it may be. So it's not ground zero. So there's never going to be, okay, close my eyes and these 4 resumes and pieces of paper is how I'm going to pick. They're already going to have spoken and done backgrounds on all of them. So there's going to be a leader in the clubhouse before the interviews even start. So should they not do the other interviews? Well, they have to because of the Rooney Rule. So does that create fake interviews like we've seen in this case? How do we fix that?
And to the extent that that takes us to a trial, we're more than willing, happy, and able to litigate that case in the court and for all the public to see.
Again, that comment, for all the public to see. That is their threat when they file a lawsuit like this.
Did Brian Flores talk to Bill before filing this lawsuit and let him know that he was going forward with this and inform him that the text messages were going to be included?
Well, look, I'll say this because whether there were conversations or not, which I'm not going to comment on. At the end of the day, Mr. Flores included these text messages in the lawsuit, not in any way, shape, or form to malign or to do anything negative or cast aspersions upon Mr. Belichick.
So he's not going to answer or comment on it, but it's already come out. Brian Flores said he did not let Bill Belichick know that he was going to put these text messages in the complaints. He did let other people know he was going to file this complaint before he did, and we'll talk about who that is later.
The bottom line is that these text messages are proof of the systemic problem that exists in the NFL. And Mr. Belichick, in our view, is also at a fork in the road in a way because he has an opportunity now to come out and stand with Mr. Flores and stand against the process that the Giants went through to ultimately hire Mr. Dable, which did not provide for equal opportunity for Mr. Flores, a qualified Black candidate.
Okay, so a couple things happened right at the end there. Number one, he basically called out Bill Belichick and said, are you going to stand with Brian Flores, or are you going to stand with systemic racism like what happened when the Giants hired Dable? Okay, that's fine. Bill Belichick can do what he wants. But what's unfair about that, everybody across the NFL, all reporters, everybody said a bunch of different teams were looking at the combination of the Bills front office guy and Brian Dable. They like what the Bills built. They like the culture. They like what they saw. From all intents and purposes, everybody wanted Brian Dable, and they knew they were almost going to come as a package deal. But once again, the Rooney Rule may create fake interviews, and Brian Flores may very well have been a fake interview. But are teams not allowed to pick a combination of GM and coach? If they were a Black combination of GM and coach, would it be okay then? That's one of the issues I have, because I think the NFL, more than any other business, winning is what gets you paid and winning is what keeps your job. I think there are great Black head coaches. I think DeMeco Ryans would be a great Black head coach. I think Brian Flores was a good Black head coach. Mike Tomlin, obviously, been around forever. A lot of success. But I think that whether you win or lose, like you can be John Elway or Michael Jordan. And if you lose as a coach or GM, you're going to get fired. And that's something I think there's a lot of evidence of. And we'll talk more about some of the differences later. If this was a normal company that you had never heard of, and I filed this lawsuit on behalf of a Black employee, and I have done that, it could get thrown out in 2 seconds if they can show that they treat Blacks the same as they treat other minorities, the same as they treat white people. And they treat them all the same, and they hire and fire them the same. When they win, they hire them. When they lose, they fire them, and they look at it the same. They don't have to show that they interview the same exact amount as minorities or Blacks or whites in every interview. That's not what the law is. There has to be a disparity in how they treat you based on race or the color of your skin. That's what the standard actually is. Now, will the standard be different because of all the public pressure and because of all the eyes on this and because we're all saying, yes, this is systemically racist, we need to fix this? Is it going to be different rules than what other companies have? Because some of the percentages he gave for one of the coordinators was like 30%. And if you have 30% of any minority in something in a normal business, you're not going to be sued for racial discrimination. Sometimes I've had cases where I've sued for racial discrimination or gender discrimination, and they have 1 or 2 employees that are similarly situated in the same gender or race, and that's enough. Because look, they fired my person, but they kept the other person who was the same race or gender. There you go. They're not doing it based on color. They're doing it based on performance. And I think that as we hear Brian Flores in these interviews, he was not fired based on the color of his skin. I think he'll even say that in one of these interviews. So it's kind of, I'm trying to follow. I get what they're doing. And listen, the NFL as a whole is probably very corrupt. I don't know. But I'm just trying to follow as a lawyer who's handled these racial discrimination and gender discrimination cases. And to me, this is a very tough case to win. And saying that, I think they're going to win. Let's jump to a Brian Flores interview now.
In Miami, when you were the head coach, you allege in the lawsuit that the owner, Stephen Ross, approached you about tanking games to get a better draft choice and said he would give you $100,000 for every game you lost. As you can imagine, that obviously has enormous repercussions. What can you tell me about the specifics of that offer? How specifically did he state that to you?
You know, that was a conversation about not doing as much as we needed to do to win football games. You know, take a flight, go on vacation. I'll give you $100,000 per loss. Like, those are just the exact words. And it's not something. Look, I deal in truth, and I say that to the players as well. I'm going to give you, good news, bad news, but it's going to be the truth. It's going to be honest.
So let's talk about this tanking situation with the Dolphins, because that's been getting all the headlines. That's been a highlight of every interview, and that's what a lot of people want to talk about. They have a big problem with tanking. Sports gambling is coming. If this is really what's going on, this is a problem. We need to fix it in the NFL. And this is potentially the reason Brian Flores was fired from being the head coach of the Dolphins. But what is it not? It's not racist. It's not systemic racism. It's not, he wasn't fired because he was Black. So I'm interested to see how they're going to tie that into the actual complaint. Is it wrong? Yes. Is racism wrong? Yes. But is this racism? Like Brian Flores isn't even saying that it's racism in the complaint or in his interviews. So that's what I'm trying to get at here is thinking about it critically and legally. Are these facts relevant to a claim of racism? Now, is it corrupt? Yes. Could there be other issues happening? Absolutely. Could it be wrongful termination based on not performing an illegal act? Yes. So we'll see how it kind of all ties together. But I think it's interesting that he keeps talking about that. And again, you heard him mention truth and integrity. That's what I'm all about.
And in that instance, look, I came from, look, this game's done a lot for me, a lot for me personally and my family. I've said this, on other, shows, but my parents are immigrants. I'm first generation. I grew up with, in a tough neighborhood here in Brooklyn, Brownsville, where there's crime and poverty and, violence. And it was hard to make it out of there. And the game of football is a reason why, or a big reason why, along with a lot of the great people mentors I've had in my life, why I was able to have the success that I've had. So to disrespect the game that way was something that, trust was lost, and there were certainly some strained relationships, and ultimately I think that was to my demise in my end.
So when listening to Brian Flores, you can just see he's an incredibly likable guy. I mean, people are going to eat him up. The jury would eat him up. They would love him. And that's why I think when you have a case like this, your client is most important. And he seems like an amazing client to have in a case like this. And as he described the situation where the Dolphins trying to bribe him to lose, that's pretty despicable. And you're not going to like them. And it's going to be the generally bad guy rule we talk about when it comes to some of these NFL owners and some people in the league that he's going to continue to talk about. So again, whether or not we like Brian Flores more than Stephen Ross or whoever we're going to be talking about, we've got to focus on what they're alleging, which is racism in the NFL. And I think some of their percentages and numbers are a really good indication of that. So we should talk more about that, I think, and focus more about that than on the tanking for this lawsuit. But we'll see. Maybe they're going to wrap it in other ways. And he said at the very end, that was to my demise. So because I was holding it to the highest integrity, I was there for truth, I wasn't going to do that to the game, that changed my life. That was to my demise, not the color of my skin, was not the reason that I got fired. Which I think is just interesting that that's how he's explaining it with his lawyers right there. And that's how he explains it in all the interviews. It's very consistent, which again, I think it probably means it's the truth, right? So now let's hear what his lawyer says, which is something that we haven't seen in the complaint and haven't heard before. At least I didn't hear it before he mentions it right here on set.
And his story is not unique.
Right.
People are tweeting out, coaches, high-level coaches who have even contacted us are talking about being in a similar situation. So, as part of what we're doing in creating this class action, is not just Coach Flores is taking the lead and making the ultimate sacrifice, but there's going to be more.
I want to make sure I'm clear here. You're saying coaches are reaching out about having been in similar situations with regard to hiring or with regard to being incentivized to lose games?
Both.
I want to come back to you.
All right. So that's an interesting semi-bombshell. Other coaches have been reaching out to them saying that they have been in similar situations. That Brian Flores' situation is not unique. And Mike Greenberg says, tanking or with the interviews and the racism? And they said both. So that's very interesting. We're going to get more coaches and we're going to hear more high-level coaches and names that we know that this has happened to. And that's how you get the groundswell. And he said the words class action. And that's what makes this so important. Getting as many people that have felt this racism in these interviews, that's how you build a case like this. One person's word against a ton of other words is not going to get it done. But if a bunch of high-level black coaches get behind Brian Flores, that is the best chance of success for this lawsuit. Now, saying that Brian Flores made the ultimate sacrifice, usually that's used in militaristic terms when somebody gives their life for their country. So I'm not sure if I'd go that far, that he's sacrificing some money to potentially get more money. But he is making a stand, and he is the one that's going to take the shots from the NFL and from a lot of teams. So he is making a sacrifice. I don't know if I call it the ultimate sacrifice.
Quickly on that, though, I want to make sure I'm perfectly clear on what he was suggesting. I don't want to put words in your mouth. You were working too hard. You were doing too much in the effort to win. He was trying to get you to do a little bit less and said, I'll give you $100,000 for every game you lose.
Exactly that. That's just not my DNA. that was never going to happen.
So what did you say to him?
That's never going to happen. I didn't come here. Look, I'm always going to try to win. That's who I am. And I owe that to the players in the locker room, but also the support staff that's in the building, who work extremely hard. If you've been in an NFL building, everyone in that building, his job is important. And everyone works hard to try to get on the same page and move in the same direction. And I felt like we were building that type of culture. So I would never do that to them, you know. And at the end of the day, I think it was the reason why I'm no longer there.
Okay, so that's the Dolphins piece of this. And then there's another piece involving the Denver Broncos, in which you allege that this is back when you were still coaching in New England and interviewing for a head coaching job in Denver, one you subsequently did not get, in which you state that in an interview that you had with them.
So this is going to be interesting. Now he's going to describe the Denver Broncos interview, okay? And he's such an interesting plaintiff because if it was Eric Bieniemy, just for example, for those of you who don't know who that is, that's the Chiefs offensive coordinator, also black. Chiefs offense, been amazing, winning Super Bowls, best quarterback in the league. He's getting all these interviews and not getting jobs. But it's interesting that Brian Flores, who got a bunch of interviews, got a job, and then is still getting interviews now to be a head coach, is the one bringing this lawsuit. To me, that's very interesting. Because I think there are potentially some other black coaches that have better claims than he does. To where if I had a client that was interviewing at a company, got a job, then got fired and was getting interviewed for similar positions, they would say, where are the damages? Where's the harm? But this is such a different kind of a lawsuit, right? That's why. That's what I'm trying to explain here. These little nuances and nitpicks are something that would affect my type of case, a normal case, that don't necessarily affect an NFL case.
That John Elway and another Broncos official showed up an hour late, looked disheveled. It was obvious to you they had been drinking heavily the night before the interview. You say it became clear they only were interviewing you to fulfill the provisions of the Rooney Rule. What specifically can you remember about that interview?
So I've had 9 interviews with NFL clubs. There's been one interview where anyone was late. And it wasn't me that was late, it was the interviewers who were late. That was with the Broncos. I think there was a reason why they were late. I think they were, they'd been out the night before. I think that's the reason why.
What made you believe that? I don't mean to interrupt you, but what gave you the impression, if you will, that they had been out drinking the night before?
Well, I mean, when you sit at a table with 5 people who are interviewing you, you know you can tell who's asking questions, who's into the interview, and who's not necessarily in the right state, I would say, in that moment. But even then, obviously, I put my best foot forward and showed why I was a good candidate for that job. I'm always going to do that. But I certainly did not feel like I was taken seriously, and that I was just there as a Rooney Rule.
Vic Fangio ultimately was hired for that job and was subsequently fired a month ago.
So this is interesting, right? Condemning partying and drinking the night before in the NFL, which a lot of us know happens. I mean, probably not a good idea to do it before an interview, before a big business meeting. But listen, does anybody watching these videos think that they're not checking boxes by interviewing black coaches and minority coaches to satisfy the Rooney Rule? That is a fact, and that is true, okay, in my opinion. I don't think it's going to take much to prove that. I think every year in every interview we can prove that, or they can prove that. How do we fix it, right? And does that make it rise to the level of racial discrimination, right? Those are the questions I have in my head. Because is this going to apply to other businesses and other companies, or is this just specific and special to the NFL? And if it's just specific and special to the NFL, let's just watch and see what happens. We can't really analyze it through normal law. Right? So that's what's interesting to me about this conversation. Let me know in the comments what's interesting to you about this conversation. So also, the Broncos hear this, obviously not good for them, and they have a response. Let's hear it.
You are aware, of course, that the Broncos have released a statement emphatically denying the allegations, giving specifics about what time the interview began, what time it ended, where it took place. They say they have notes. What is your reaction to that?
I deal in truth. That's my reaction. I deal in truth. Honesty, integrity is important to me, and hopefully there's a day where we find out the truth on that one.
So the Broncos released a statement emphatically denying it. They have notes and time about when it started, when it stopped. To me, that indicates that it wasn't an early morning interview. Potentially it was if it was at 4 p.m., obviously they weren't out drinking the night before that affected them at 4 p.m. or something like that. Their notes show that they were paying attention. Maybe they have notes as to why they didn't hire him, which that was kind of a cool thing in the complaint, that they want specific reasons why they hire who they hire and why they don't hire who they hire, which I think could be helpful. But as somebody who's sued companies for this, I know companies can stuff files with why they didn't hire a black employee that I represent that is bogus and doesn't make sense, but it's down on a piece of paper, and technically that can be a reason they don't want to hire him. So, I mean, I think that sounds like a good idea, but it's just something that we can say is lip service again and is not real and going to the heart of the issue again and fixing the problem. That's the issue I have with a lot of these kind of remedies. And he says, again, I'm about truth, and I hope the truth comes out.
Once again, to be clear, there's no question in your mind about your recollection of this, regardless of what they say. Yeah. Okay, and so now, as I pointed out repeatedly this morning, you are currently a candidate for 2 vacant head coaching positions in the NFL, in New Orleans and in Houston. Yep. How have you handled those situations with regard to filing this lawsuit?
Well, before we filed the class action, I sent messages to both teams, letting them know that we would be filing, but also that I still had was very interested in coaching and leading, either one of those teams. Look, coaching it's what I love. It's a passion of mine. It's, I'm called and gifted to do it. And the reasons why is because I love helping young people reach their potential and become the best version of themselves on and off the field. Mm-hmm.
So that's who he actually did tell about the lawsuit before he filed it. Houston and New Orleans, 2 teams currently interviewing him to be a head coach. He's a good candidate, but obviously he comes with this, which is going to bring some controversy to your team. And we've seen it with Colin Kaepernick, with Tim Tebow. When people bring controversy to the team, usually they don't get a job, right? Whether you agree with it or disagree with it, whatever side of any aisle you're on. So it's a very interesting and weird position for these 2 teams to be in. And if I was them and I was going to hire him, I'd hire him. If I wasn't going to hire him and I was going to hire somebody else, I would potentially send an email comparing him and the other candidate and to let him know exactly why I chose the other candidate. Because that's what he's asking for in his complaint. That would clear my name. Obviously, I would take the interview seriously, as they should have anyways. So you better believe the legal teams of those 2 teams are involved in the interview process right now. And just before we were about to post this video, John Elway has now responded, and Stephen Ross, the owner of the Dolphins, has responded to the allegations made in Brian Flores' complaint. We're going to put John Elway's response on the screen. And as you can see, parts of this case are going to be fought to the bitter end. People's characters and names are on the line and being called out. He uses words like defamatory, which rings bells in lawyers' heads. Will there be a countersuit for defamation of character? He said he's got notes, and he took that interview very seriously. He also said that there were other reasons he may have looked disheveled, and commenting on his appearance was rude, basically, is what he says. So there is a lot of big personalities coming through this case, a lot of alphas, a lot of money, and I think this is going to be a spicy battle in court and in the court of public opinion. So I'm really interested in continuing to follow this case because it's really interesting to me and we learn something new every day. Let me know what you think about it. If you have any questions or comments, leave them below. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our page. Until next time. Thanks for watching this episode of The Lawyer You Know. If you like this content, please share it with your friends. Make sure you subscribe to our page and like our videos. If you want some interaction, get in the comments and we'll be sure to get back to you. If you want to know any more information about our firm or this page, you can find out in the description or visit tragoslaw.com. We post multiple times throughout the week, so make sure you hit that bell so you can get the notification and not miss out on the next episode.